Today we are very, very excited to have Sandy Rees speaking with us. Sandy shows founders and leaders of small nonprofits how to fully fund their dream so they can make a difference in the world. She has helped dozens of small nonprofits go from nickel and dime fundraising to adding six figures to their bottom line. As the host of Fundraising TV, she shows her students how to find ideal donors, connect through authentic messaging, and build relationships that stand the test of time so that fundraising becomes easy and predictable. Everyone else, just a few quick reminders. There will be time for Q&A at the end, but if you have questions throughout, just jot them just put them down in the chat box. I'll jot them down and we will answer them at the end. Lastly, everyone that is not speaking, please mute your microphone as a courtesy to everyone that is speaking. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Sandy.
Thank you. And hi, everybody. It's nice to be here. Let me go ahead and share the screen so that we can get to the slides. I'm super excited to talk with you, and I apologize my video camera is not working for whatever dumb reason, but that's okay. You get to see the picture of me here. We're going to talk about fundraising specifically for food pantries. And I'm very excited about this. This is good news for you. I've got a lot of ideas for you and tips, and you are going to be getting a lot of great insight. If you have a big vision for your food pantry, if you know you want to make a bigger difference in your community, maybe you'd like to raise more money to grow your programs, add programs, expand programs, you'd like to hire staff or maybe just pay yourself, or if you've just not yet mastered fundraising, would love it to be easier, you're in the right place. I've actually done all of those things specifically for food pantries. Before I get too far ahead, let me introduce myself. Lily gave me a great introduction a minute ago, but this is me. I'm a fundraising coach and trainer. I love this. Love doing this work. This is how I spend my days, is talking about, thinking about, teaching fundraising. I am the founder and host of a program called Fundraising TV that I'll tell you a little bit more about later. This is one of the many animals that lives at my house. This is my old cat, Ginger. She's a sweetie. I know sometimes you come to a webinar like this and you think, oh, this is great, but this person is the expert. They've known this forever. And what I want you to know is that I was not born with fundraising skills. Just like you, I did not always know how to do this. I did not sign up for fundraising at Career Day. I, like most people, fell into it. In the late 90s, I was doing marketing for a corporate staffing company in Knoxville, Tennessee. There was an opportunity to go for a tour at the local rescue mission, and I was very curious, so I did. And me being me, I ask a lot of questions, and the next thing I know, I get a phone call from them, and they said, hey, do you want to come join our board? And isn't that what we do when we get somebody with a pulse? They seem remotely interested, so we ask them to join our board, and I didn't have any idea what that meant at the time, so I said yes, and I was immediately in over my head, which happens to a lot of people, I think. So I was on the board there for about a year, and then a job came open in their resource development office, and that's a fancy way to say fundraising. And I looked at it and said, I can do that. It's marketing. That's all it is. So I talked to the president of the organization. He and I agreed that I had the skill set. So I quit my job, resigned from the board. I took that job, and I've never looked back. Fundraising is what I'm supposed to be doing. And about a year later, I made a lateral move over to Second Harvest Food Bank. And that's when the skies opened and the angels sang, and I knew I was doing the work that I was supposed to be doing. And one of the things that happened while I was there was that our agency relations coordinator came to me one day and she said, oh my gosh, I just met the nicest people. They run the food pantry out in Newport, but they are struggling for money. Can you help them? And I said, sure. So I went out and talked to them. I loved what they were doing, gave them some ideas. They started implementing, and it worked. And that's really where I got my start in consulting, really, and in helping small food pantries figure out how to raise money. So I want you to know I've been actually doing this for a really long time, like 20 years, helping small food pantries. I'm going to get ahead of myself if I don't watch it. I wound up building the whole fundraising program there from, gosh, we were raising maybe a couple $100,000 to 1.2 million in less than 5 years. We built it big and strong, and we were able to serve so many more people, which was amazing. From there, I worked at an after-school music program for a little while, and then in 2005, I started Get Fully Funded, and that's what I've been doing for the last 16 years, is teaching people how to raise money. This is a shot from our Inspired Fundraising Retreat, which we do every year. It's 2 days of really doing a deep dive into fundraising, but most of my days look more like this with earbuds and monitors and all of that, trying to help people literally all over the world, which is fun. All right, so just to give you a little context on me, I have been doing this a long time. I understand the challenges you face. I've worked in really small organizations. The clients that we have now range from, I think our biggest client was a $26 million organization that served the entire state of Virginia. And the smallest ones are just getting started, and they're completely all volunteer. So whichever end of that your organization is on, I get you. And I've got some ideas today that I think are going to work for you. So let's jump in. There's a truth that we're going to build on today when it comes to fundraising, and that is when you raise more money, you can change more lives. And that's really the very simple principle that we operate on. I'll never forget the day that I was working on an event that we were having at the food bank. I needed to call and ask local restaurants to make a donation of food. And some of you probably experienced that as well. Most of us do not like cold calling. I did not want to do that. That was the day that I said, would you look at all the filing? My goodness, I need to clean up my office, right? Isn't that what we do? We got this hard thing we have to do. We don't want to do it. So we find all the other things we procrastinate. So I cleaned up my office that day, and I still could not get in the right mindset to make those phone calls. And so what I did is I went down into our warehouse. You guys all know how food banks work, right? It's an amazing, amazing thing, really, to go sit in. I sat on a pallet next to a bunch of cases of, I don't know, it was probably cornflakes or something, looking around, I was watching people come and go. And it occurred to me that my job was really, really relevant to those operations. And that when I did my job well and raised money, the food pantries that depended on our food bank were able to get what they needed. When I did my job well, they gave out more food boxes. When I did my job, people ate. And I'll never, ever forget that realization. It struck me right between the eyes, and I never forgot it. And that really gave me a lot of courage moving forward. I went right back to my office that day. I picked up the phone and I started making phone calls because I did not want anybody going hungry just because I was too scared to make that call. So that gave me a lot of courage. And I wanted to share that with you just in case anybody's feeling a little uncomfortable about asking people for money. Just reframe it that way. When you have the funds you need, you can feed more people. And when you have the courage to do the things you need to do, people are going to eat. And it's that simple. Now, there's a lot of nonprofits that struggle with fundraising. You may be thinking, well, but Sandy, last year was ridiculous. We're still kind of in a pandemic, even though here in Tennessee, a lot of things are back to normal. You'd never know there was a pandemic. In other places, it's not quite that way. But here's the deal. Even before the pandemic, there were a lot of organizations that were struggling. And here's what I saw. I saw people doing fundraising backwards, where they would try to go out and just raise as much as they could and then come back and figure out how to spend it. That's backwards. You need to figure out what you need first, have a goal, a very specific goal, and go out and try to raise that. Some organizations are chasing nickels and dimes. In other words, they're thinking so small. They're doing little restaurant nights at Buffalo Wild Wings and barely making $100 when they could be doing other things that bring in 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 or 100,000. So they're chasing all these very, very small opportunities. I see a lot of organizations that try to do what we call sole source funding. And what that means is relying on one revenue stream for their funds. Sometimes food pantries that are supported by churches, or maybe they're located in a specific church and they get money from that church, then they decide they're going to figure out how to make the whole thing work just with that money instead of going out and really doing true fundraising. So if you're struggling and it's one of those issues, then I invite you to draw a line in the sand today and say, you know what, I want to do it different. I don't want to be a struggling organization. I want to be an organization my community can count on. And I want to make sure that we're here to feed people for the long haul. I'm really sure that if you're listening to this, you are dedicated to your cause. You care about whether or not people eat. You get it. I get it. And so I want to show you some things today that can make this really different. Now, we named the business Get Fully Funded because that's what I ended up doing at Second Harvest, and that's what I want for all my clients. I want you to learn how to raise all the money you need to completely fund your budget and to pay for any equipment you need, freezers, coolers, pans, trays, forklifts, whatever you need. I want you to find a way to get it. Now, it might require a shift in your thinking. So I've put this chart together just so you can see what it looks like if you're an underfunded organization, which means you don't have all the money you need, and what that looks like compared to a fully funded organization. And you can either grab a screenshot of this or we'll share the slides with you. There's a couple of these that I want to point out. One is that underfunded organizations tend to be focused on, quote, fundraisers. And that looks like that Chick-fil-A night or setting up a table in front of the Walmart or any kind of little nickel and dime fundraiser. And you tend to go from one fundraiser to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And you know as well as I do that that's exhausting. It's exhausting. Underfunded organizations tend to believe in the myth of the shoestring budget. What that means is they think because it's a nonprofit, they're supposed to struggle. And that's just not true. They tend to be all about the money. They tend to be very, very focused on, we just got to do what we got to do to raise this money so we can pay for this thing. And what I want to do is shift your thinking today and talk about what good fundraising looks like. I want you to learn to think like a fully funded organization. Instead of fundraisers, you start thinking about your donors. You start thinking about them as partners in your work. They're not just an ATM. They're not just a source of money. They are a partner in helping make things happen. Instead of living from one cash infusion to the next, or one event to the next, or one fundraiser to the next, fully funded organizations have a steady stream of revenue all year long. And let me tell you, that lets you sleep at night. You've got diversified revenue. You're very comfortable raising large amounts of money. You're not good with status quo, and you find a way to overcome it. And the biggest thing is you understand that the relationship is worth more than the donation. The donor and the relationship is worth way more than the donation you're going to get today, because there are future donations that can come about when you take really good care of your donors. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. We call it donor-based fundraising. I believe that it is time to do something. We have so many people who have been hurt in the last year, who have lost jobs, who have needed food pantries, and we have to step up. This is actually a shot from one of our clients in South Texas. They pivoted quickly last year, responded in a big way, and actually saw the number of families that they were able to feed quadruple in a very short period of time. I was very, very proud of the work that they were doing to make a huge difference in their community. Even before the pandemic, there's always families who are struggling, and that's why our organizations exist, is to make a difference for them. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of what fundraising is all about and how you can raise more. Fundraising is yes, it's about gathering the funds and the resources you need to operate, but there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can either be all focused on the check or all focused on the money, or you can really laser in on the donor and think about it more strategically. A lot of organizations are almost like the little orphan boy Oliver in Oliver Twist, like they're just begging, please, can I have some? You never want to come from that place of begging. Usually if somebody feels like they're begging, it's because they see the work that they're doing as less in value than the donation that somebody's making. Let me say that a different way. People are going to give your organization money to do your good work. The work that you do is equal or greater in value than the money that they give. And you have to see it that way. You never need to beg. You never need to arm twist. You never need to heavily influence somebody. All you need to do is stand really confident in the fact that the work your organization does is noble, it's needed, it's making a difference, and it has value. You don't need to beg. You don't need to do without. You just need to explain to people what you're doing. And that's one of the things that I want to share with you today, is a way that you can talk about the work your organization is doing. So good fundraising is what we're talking about. It's donor focused. It is a partnership between the donor and the organization. Because the truth is, you may have donors who say, you know what, I hate the thought that people are going hungry. I would do something about it if I knew what to do, or if they had time. Time is the biggest obstacle. And so what's easier for them to do is just hit your donate button or send a check. The other thing you need to understand is that giving is transformational for the donor and for the charity. The bigger the donation, the bigger the transformation for both. A lot of times you'll get somebody who makes their very first major gift. Maybe they give your organization $5,000 or $10,000. That is a high watermark for them personally because it feels so amazing. And if you handle it right, they're going to want to do it again because it was awesome. So just keep that in mind. There's if you haven't noticed already, there's a whole lot of shifting of thinking that you need to do if you want to learn to raise more money. Yeah, there's strategy and there's technique, and I can teach you that all day long, but I need you to understand you have to think differently about this in order to really get where you need to go. So if fundraising is about the partnership and the donor, it's not begging, it's not arm twisting, it's not about selling stuff, although there's opportunities to do that and do it well, but you don't need to be constantly selling candles, candy, t-shirts, all that sort of stuff. All right, let's look at the 3-part formula for success that we teach all of our students and all of our clients. And it works like this. When you talk to the right people at the right time with the right message, you will get a donation. The end. And this is just how it works. So if your organization is struggling, I want you to try to figure out where it's breaking down. Are you maybe talking to the wrong people? Are you talking to people who don't give to charity? Are you talking to people who their favorite charity is the Cancer Society? It's not the food pantry. It might be that you're talking to the wrong people. Or maybe the timing is wrong. And timing actually is, it comes in a couple of ways and it can be a little tricky. It might be that you're simply asking some more, and the timing is just off, that you need to give people a break and you need to make them feel good. And you need to really think about the relationship and how that's building. Or maybe your message is off. Maybe the messaging is very inwardly focused and it's boring and it just doesn't resonate. So we're going to dig into each one of these. I'm going to give you a little insight into how to make this work for your organization. So let's start with the right people. So the first thing you need to know is not everybody gives to charity. And that's just the way it is. You are not going to convince somebody to give if they don't want to. It's not required. Nobody has to donate money. So don't even worry about people who don't give. So what I want you to do is think about who are the right people to give to your organization. And if this grid represented everybody in your community, who are you looking for? Are you looking for all the men with red ties? Are you looking for everybody wearing a cobalt blue shirt? Like, how can you identify clearly who your people are so that you're not using a shotgun approach across the whole community, but you're really focusing your efforts on people who are most likely to care about the work that you're doing? I've got a really cool trick I'm going to show you in a minute to figure this out. But here's why you need to focus on the right people and why you need to build your donor base. When you build what I call a big, loyal donor base, it is like having a mountain of cash at your disposal anytime that you want it. I figured this out really fast when I was at the food bank. It was great when I got there and there were, I don't know, about 1,000 donors, which was awesome. But I knew that that was not going to be enough to build the kind of fundraising that I wanted to have. And so I started looking for ways to build the donor base. And by the time I left 5 years later, we had 8,500 donors. And let me tell you, every time I sent out an appeal, every time I sent out any kind of request for get a ticket for our event or volunteer for this or donate to this food drive, people responded because I had a very large donor family and I built relationships to the point that they loved the work we were doing. So fundraising got really easy. It also got to be predictable. I'll never forget the day I was at a board meeting and the CFO of Pilot Corporation was on our board and he looked at me and he said, "How do you do that?" And I said, "What do you mean, Mitch?" And he goes, "Your estimates on fundraising are just eerily accurate. How did you do that?" I said, "Well, first of all, I pay attention. I know what my history is. I know what the numbers are from the past, but I'm also really working hard to build relationships with people. So I can tell you, if I send out an appeal in September, I can about tell you how much money we're going to raise, because I knew my donors. I knew how this worked. And that's one of the things that I want for you. I want you to get to that point where you can estimate with eerie accuracy how much you can raise. Because when you get to that point, now you're creating sustainability. Now you're creating predictability. Now you can, with confidence, invest in programs and more staff and things like that, because you know your people are going to support it. Here's what gets in the way for most organizations of building their big, loyal donor base. The first is what we call the passion myth. And that is where people think, well, I got to go find people who are crazy passionate about food pantries. No, you really don't. They have to care, but they don't have to be crazy passionate. So don't worry about their passion level. If they care, they're going to give. And what's more important is the message that you use and how inspiring it is. More on that in a minute. The next thing that gets in the way is broad appeal. And boy, this one is tricky for a food pantry. I certainly bought into this 20 years ago because I thought, boy, everybody ought to care about our neighbors going hungry. Everybody should care. And so if I put a billboard up on the side of the interstate, everybody will see that and they will give. And the truth is, it doesn't really work that way. While hunger is a cause that a lot of people are going to care about, not everybody will. People have their favorite causes. So don't buy into this notion that the entire community will give, because that's not how it works. Probably the most common reason that most organizations don't have a big loyal donor base is inconsistent outreach. So they are just not working on it regularly enough to be building the donor base. Now, building a donor base is an awful lot like building a snowman. And I'm very aware that I'm talking to people in Arizona, so you may or may not see a lot of snow where you are, depending on where you are. And if you've ever built a snowman, you know it takes a minute to get it started, to get the first ball. You have to get a handful of snow and another handful of snow and another handful of snow. And you got to pack it in, and at some point you can put it on the ground and start pushing it around. And there comes the point where it starts to build faster and faster and faster. And then every time you push it, well, wow, it's adding inches and inches to that snowball. And then you get to the point where you can't push it anymore because it's gotten too big and heavy. And that's how your donor base is going to grow. It's going to be 1 at a time, 2 at a time, 5 at a time, 10 at a time initially. And then it's going to start to be 100 at a time and 500 at a time. And then it's going to take on a life of its own. It's going to grow really big and really fast. That's when this gets to be a lot of fun. So here's a trick that I want you to use, especially if you're sitting there thinking, well, this all sounds great, but where do I find new donors? First thing I want to tell you is you probably have donors all around you that you just have not given a reason to give. So first, look around you at your volunteers, friends and family, maybe even people who are receiving food boxes. You just never know, and they might want to give you a very small donation because it's a matter of pride for them. So definitely look around you. And then what I want you to do is really start thinking in on ideal donors. So this is a marketing strategy, just plain and simple. What we're going to do is we're going to create what we call an ideal donor profile. And I want you to think about who is your best donor. We're going to think about them in terms of demographics and psychographics. So you can literally just take a piece of paper and jot this down. As you think about your best donors, are they male or female? Do they tend to be older, younger, middle-aged, or maybe you don't know, and that's okay. What do they value? What do they do for fun? What do they do with their family? Where do they spend their time? Where do they spend their money? And what else do you know about them? Now, you may or may not know much about them. The very first time I did this exercise, I remember sitting in a workshop and I was like, I don't really know any of my donors. So all I could do is think of 2 or 3 that I knew, and that had to work. And honestly, it did work. I was in this workshop as part of America's Second Harvest. It's called Feeding America Now. And what they did is they walked us through and said, hey, we've got this consultant, they've been doing this research, and they're going to tell us about our ideal donor and who they are. And I was like, great, let me write this down. So let me go ahead and share some of this with you so that you know who you're looking for. I thought you might appreciate this. More than likely, most of your best donors are women. And they could be any age range. I've seen great donors to food pantries be in their 30s. I've seen them be in their 80s. I've seen everything in between. So age isn't so much, although it tends to be that the older people get, the more discretionary income they have. So the more money they have to give away, but not always. They can't stand to see anyone struggle, especially with food. So if you're focusing on elderly or kids, they are going to respond to that. They probably support other human causes like rescue missions, domestic violence shelters, and so forth. So what that means is you can use that to your advantage if there's ever an opportunity to partner with another organization on an event or an open house or something else. You want to really think hard about that, because that may be an opportunity to meet new donors, people who are supporting their organization. Your donors are probably moms. They probably got kids or grandkids. They value their family. They're going to spend a lot of time with family. Holidays are a big deal. They are probably active in community groups and or church. So they may be members of a Rotary Club or a garden club, book clubs, civic clubs. They're probably members of women's groups at their church. They're very active people, more than likely. And they probably volunteer for other nonprofits. They probably support several other nonprofits, and they probably volunteer somewhere. So the question is, so here's what I want you to do, first of all, is take that list and go look at some of your best donors and ask yourself, is that our ideal donor profile? Does that work for my organization? It's probably pretty close. I would say for most everybody, that's probably 90 to 95% of your donors. The more you know about them, the more you can answer the big question, which is, where can you find these people easily and in large numbers? Let me tell you what I did. I came back from that workshop that I was telling you about, where the consultant said, look, we've done the research. Here's what you're looking for. And I said, wonder where I can find these people. And the first thing that popped in my head was, wow, women's groups at churches would probably be a great place to find them, where I can talk to people one-to-many, not one-to-one. Because you can go find new donors one-to-one, but it's going to take you a while. If you can find new donors one-to-many and bring them in 10 and 20 and 30 and 50 at a time, you can grow your donor base much faster. So I ask around board and staff, hey, does anybody go to a church where they have a women's group? And I got 3 or 4 leads pretty fast, and I reached out to them and said, hey, did you ever need speakers? And 2 or 3 of them said, yes, we would love for you to come and speak to our group. And I said, good. I put together a good presentation. This is key. Has to be a good presentation. I went out and spoke. The very first one I talked to was a Methodist church in probably the wealthiest part of town. And there were probably 50 ladies there that night. I got names and email for every single one. The treasurer of the group handed me a check before I left. Probably a dozen women were handing me cash and checks as I left, and I got 2 invitations to speak at other places. That was a win, and a big win. That was huge. I walked away from that and went, well, that worked. I'm doing that again. Now, the nice thing about that is that didn't cost me anything. All it cost me was my time to set it up, my time to build the presentation, my time to go out and do it. To get 50 potential donors and probably 10 or 20 new donors, that was totally worth it. So share that story with you just to inspire you that you actually can go out and find new people very easily and very quickly. There's so much more I can tell you about that, but I want to move on to the next piece, because this one's really important. This is about the right message. And to illustrate this, I want to show you this picture. If you can see the slides, do you know what restaurant that is from? This is my favorite restaurant. And if you just said Cheesecake Factory, you would be right. I have actually eaten at Cheesecake Factory in Phoenix. I've eaten at Cheesecake Factory in probably a couple of dozen cities across the country. The thing that I have found in every single Cheesecake Factory I go into is right when you walk in, you see this case. In every single restaurant. They don't hide this in the back. It is right up front. You know why? Because they lead with what's most delicious. And there's a lot of good food to be had at Cheesecake Factory. When you go in and see that, the first thing you're going to do is go over and start drooling, and you start picking out and deciding what cheesecake you want to have. The only thing that will drag you away from that case is when they tell you your table is ready. Right? There's something to be learned from this, and that is leading with what's most delicious. So what we have to do is figure out what is delicious that you can share with your audience. So once you identify your ideal donor prospects and you start building your donor base, you have to share messaging that is on point and delicious. Most nonprofits mess this up. And the warning that I want to give you here is don't make donors burn calories trying to figure out what you want them to do. Don't share messaging that's boring. Don't try to make them guess what you want. Here's some things that get in your way. Lots of nonprofits mess this up. They start by being self-centered. What that looks like is anything you read of theirs, whether it's their website, their social media, their newsletters, their thank you letters, their appeals, it always says we, us, us, us. We are trying to do this. We're trying to reach our goal. We need to raise this money. We. That gets really old really fast. I mean, think about it. Do you have a friend that all they do is talk about themselves? They never ask you how you're doing? Yeah, you don't want your donors to feel that way. Another thing is that organizations focus on the wrong thing. My friend Beth Brodowski said this once. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. She said, people want to fund your impact, not your existence. In other words, people don't care what your operating budget is. They don't care that you need to raise money to keep the lights on or to pay for your truck. What they want to know is, what are you doing that's making a difference? How can we help you feed more people? And that's what you have to focus on. And the final piece here that gets in the way is what I'm going to call jargon breath. And this is where you use acronyms, industry slang, or anything that your audience won't understand. So to do this, we're going to play a little game. So I have on the screen here a jargoned up version of a very common phrase, and I want you to see if you can figure out, what does this really say? Instead of members of an avian species of identical plumage congregate, this really means birds of a feather flock together. See how that works? Let's do another one because this is fun. What does this really say? It is impossible to indoctrinate a superannuated canine in innovative maneuvers. Can't teach an old dog a new trick. See that? And yet so many of us do this thing where we think, oh, I got to sound really smart, so I got to use some big words. And we don't really need to do that. What we need to do is use everyday language so that people understand it. One more. Freedom from incrustations of grime is contiguous to possessing divine attributes. And if you said cleanliness is next to godliness, you'd be right. All right, so lose the jargon. The jargon doesn't help you. You need to be conversational. You need to use language that anybody can understand. Now, sometimes organizations think, or you'll get somebody on your board that says, oh my gosh, we need to share the numbers. We got to share the statistics. So here's what I want to share with you about that. Fundraising is an emotional activity. People make the decision to give based on what they feel. So they make the decision to give from the heart, and then they justify it in the head. Will you ever inspire somebody to make an emotional decision with a statistic? Possibly, but not likely. You're going to motivate somebody to give emotionally with a story. So start with a story, lead with a story, and then use one really well-chosen stat to back it up so that people then have what they need to appeal to both the heart and the head. And that's what makes this work. Now here's one more number that you can use. I love this one. It works every single time. And that is what we call core number. Your core number is an expression of what it costs you to deliver a unit of service. So the first thing is you have to figure out what your unit of service is. And it's probably one food box for one family or one food box for one person. And the way you calculate this is you look back over a year, and it could literally be a calendar year, a fiscal year, the last 12 months, whatever you want to do. You look at the total units of service for that time period, and then you look at your total expenses for the organization. And I mean total expenses, everything, not just what you spent on boxes or bags, not what you spent to buy supplemental food, not any money that you spent on just that service delivery, but everything. So if you had to pay somebody to do your $9.90, that counts. If you paid to attend a fundraising conference, that counts. if anything you spent, because the truth is you don't have extraneous expenses. Everything that you spend money on is necessary for your organization. So you calculate this, and what you'll find, and I apologize, these are all animal welfare examples, but I'll give you a food pantry one here in just a second. In this instance, we see $6.20 a day to feed, shelter, and care for a cat. My food pantry that I work with in South Texas, theirs was $12.50 something cents. I forget what, I think it was $12.51 to provide an emergency food box for a family of 3 for a week. Now, that's super helpful because you can turn around and share that in your appeals and on social media, and all of a sudden people get it. It takes the fear of rejection off your shoulders, because no longer are you saying, please, will you help? You're saying you can provide a week's worth of food for $12.51. And people know exactly how their money is going to be used, which they love that. So I really recommend that you calculate and use your core number. There is actually a core number calculator on my website at getfullyfunded.com. If you go there and look on the free resources page, you'll see the core number calculator link. So go take advantage of that. Now this is a shot from an email that the local rescue mission sent out. I wanted you just to see a good example of how they're using a core number. And for them, they may have a core number for what it costs them for housing. They have another core number for feeding people. They have a huge soup kitchen. So for them, it's $1.87 to provide a meal. I remember the very first time I saw that number, what rolled through my head was, there's no way it can be $1.87. Well, yeah, it can, because they get a lot of food donated from the food bank. And then the other thing that rolls through the head, you'll see that that's a weird number. It's not $1.90. It's not $2, it's $1.87. There's a piece of psychology behind that where people will think, oh, you know your numbers. You actually calculated that, and it builds trust. So use the weird number. So the big question here is, what delicious thing are you asking people to support? Are you telling people that you need to reach your goal, please give? Or are you saying for $12.51, you can provide an emergency food box to a family in need? That's the way you need to go, by the way. Crunch that number. Go on my website and get the core number calculator. It's free. You just plug your numbers in. It'll do it for you. All right, the last piece of this whole formula of right people, right message, right time is timing. And we're talking about timing of relationships. So there actually is timing of the year, which fall and holiday season is definitely the time when you want to be asking people to give, because statistically we see more donations made in the fourth quarter of the year than any other time. And online donations, December is the biggest by far, and the last week of December is the biggest giving week of the year, bar none. But I want to talk a little bit about relationships with donors. So here you see this lovely couple, and you can probably guess what this picture is about, what's going on in this picture. My question for you is, do you think she wore that dress on the first date? Yeah, probably not. Probably not. What happened before they got to this stage? Well, there was probably some dating, right? There was probably some, hey, let's go to the movies, or let's go out for coffee, or let's take a hike in the woods, or whatever they wanted to do. There was some relationship building that had to happen before they jumped into a very steep commitment. And one of the things that happens a lot with small nonprofits is they're so focused on the money that they forget to build a relationship, and they try to jump in bed on the first date with a donor. And it just doesn't work real well. So we have to shift your thinking about this. By the way, that was my daughter at her wedding about 5 years ago, which is super fun. All right, so I just mentioned the right time can be a season, but we really need to think about that it's more about the relationship. It's more about when you're asking and what you're doing when you're not asking. So I want to show you this. It's a fundraising cycle. It has 3 parts. There's an ask, where you're asking people to give, whether you're doing that in email or in a letter or online. People give and you thank them. And then you need to follow up. And this is the place that most nonprofits fail. They don't do any follow-up, or their thanking is very poor. And what they wind up doing is ask, and ask some more. And that's exhausting. Nobody likes it, and your donors will leave. So if you don't take anything else away from this today, take this, that you have to thank people well, and you have to update them later about what happened to their donation. And when you do that, they are going to be more likely to want to give again. And let me just tell you, it is easier to get a second donation, a third donation, a 20th donation from one donor than to go out and find brand new donors all the time. So we have to really pay attention to what's happening when we're thanking and updating, because that's where donor retention happens. What does that look like in practical terms? That means you have to be doing things like sending a regular newsletter that makes the donor smile. You have to have a thank you letter that warms their heart. You need good stories and video and photos and social media. Now, that it doesn't have to be hard, it does need to be authentic, and you need to think about it. You have to stop long enough to really think about what's going to resonate with my donor. Because here's the other thing. I want you to learn to think about it this way. The relationship with each one of your donors is like an individual piggy bank. So imagine a piggy bank for each one of your donors. Every time you make them feel good, whether it's with a story, a photo, an update, or something, anytime they smile and you make them feel good, you're making a deposit. Anytime you ask for something, whether you're asking for a donation, you're asking them to buy a ticket, you're asking them to volunteer, to give to a food drive, or do something else, you are making a withdrawal. Now, you don't have to be an accountant to know that if you make more withdrawals and deposits, that account is going to close. So you have to really think about what you're doing when you're not asking. And the good news is, with fundraising season right around the corner, now is a perfect time to be thinking about, what are we doing? And is our newsletter good enough? And what do our thank you letters look like? Are they making donors smile? Because if they're not, you need to back up and work on all of that. And you've got time to really build up a good positive balance in that account before you start asking during year end. Okay, here's some things that get in the way of building relationships. One is desperation mode. I get it. From time to time, you find yourself in that financial pinch, but you cannot go to donors and say, if we don't raise $5,000 this week, we're going to close our doors. That's desperate. Desperation stinks, and donors will smell it and go the other way. So even if you're in desperation mode, be very careful about what you say. You can only use the sinking ship appeal once. If you tell donors you're about to close the door, that does not build trust. That tells them you don't know what you're doing, organizing your organization and keeping it well managed, and they might help you out once, but they're not going to come back and do it over and over. The ick factor. Some of you probably are going to nod your head and go, yep, this is me. Ick factor is when you feel just uncomfortable asking for money or uncomfortable building relationships. And maybe you even think, aren't they going to know I'm just trying to get their money? Well, that kind of depends on where you're coming from. If you're coming from a place in your heart where all you care about is their money, then yeah, that's icky. If you come from a place of seeing that donor as a partner and as someone who can help fund the good work so you can feed people, if you keep it focused on those you serve, it's not so icky. You're fine. And maybe you're just skipping the ABCs. You're just getting away from the basics of fundraising. You're trying to move too fast to the raising the big bucks, and you're just not laying groundwork that you need to lay. You're not paying attention to how you communicate and what you share, and you're not paying enough individual attention to some of your best donors. So absolutely don't do that. Now, I like practical tactical, so I want to give you a practical tactical tool that you can use right now. And it is the 3-to-1 ratio. People ask me all the time, how often can we ask donors for money? Because some people get really uncomfortable. And sometimes you have board members who say, oh no, we already asked in January and that's enough. We don't want to ask them any more than once a year. I wouldn't do that. I think you can ask more than once a year, but how often depends on what your donors are used to. And it depends on what you do when you're not asking. The 3-to-1 ratio says you can ask as often as you want to, as long as in between the asks, there are 3 really good, juicy connecting, feel-good communications. So in between your asks, you got to have newsletters that make people call you and say, that's the most amazing story I've ever heard. You've got to have video updates and other methods of reaching out to donors that just make them feel really good. Now, the issue here is that sometimes people say, well, yeah, we do a newsletter, but the reality is their newsletter is crap. It's very inwardly focused. It's all we, us. That doesn't work. That's not what I'm talking about here. Your stale, dry thank you letter you haven't changed in 5 years is not one of these communications. Your boring, slap together at the last minute newsletter is not one of these. Your inwardly focused social media posts, they're not one of these. So it has to be very donor focused, it has to be intentional about making them feel good. When you do that, then you can ask pretty often. 3 or 4 asks a year, that's probably about right on the money. So if you're thinking about, well, I'd like to do maybe a back to school appeal, that works really well, especially if you have kids programs. And then another appeal in maybe early November, and then a last minute appeal at the end of December, you can totally get away with that. That's plenty, because you've got space in between there to do all kinds of really good things to show donors how much you appreciate them. Now, the one thing about all of this is you're not going to do any of this well if you are shooting from the hip. Trust me, I know, I used to be a hip shooter. You have to have a plan. You've got to get all your ideas put together into a plan so that you know what you need to be doing and when and what's coming next. That plan is going to make it easier for you to get volunteers on board with you, your board on board with you, the rest of your team. It's actually very nice when you have a plan put together, because then you can go to your board and you can say, okay, here's what we're going to do for the rest of the year. I need everybody to tell me where they want to help. That's a great strategy actually for your board. The point here is get a plan together and get it in writing. If it's not written down, it's not real. It's not written down, it's not real. So get it in writing, and then you can really start putting some wheels in motion to make some amazing things happen. This is how this works. And then what you want to do is start to learn from things. You're going to put something into motion, you're going to implement, and then you want to learn from it and say, okay, so I did this thing and here's what happened. Refine it, go again, refine it, go again. This is what I did when I was at the food bank. And it took me, well, the whole first year I threw a lot of spaghetti at the wall just trying to figure out what I was doing because I didn't know. And about going into year 2, I really started to get some traction, because I was curious and I kept asking, why did this work or why did that not work? And 4 years later, we basically were raising an additional $1 million over what we were raising when I got there. And we had grown the donor base and put all kinds of things in place. I put a monthly giving program in place. I put a major giving program in place. We started sending out appeals regularly and newsletters, all kinds of stuff. And it was amazing. It was the most amazing thing I think I've ever experienced work-wise. And that's what I want for you. The key to all of this is about building trust. It's building trust with your audience, with your donors, with your volunteers, with your prospects, because people give to nonprofits they trust. They volunteer with nonprofits they trust. They will recommend to their friends nonprofits that they trust. And when you show up consistently and you have a message that makes them feel good consistently, all that builds trust. And then they're going to want to help. So, now what? Now, look back through your notes, see what you've written down today. Find your best ideas and put them into motion. You truly need to set some goals around the number of new donors you want to try to pick up in the next 6 months or so. You want to think about your messaging and how you want to refine that. You want to think about how you can start to really work on the relationships with donors. Set some goals, put your plan in writing, get some help, and get busy. There's a lot to do, but again, the nice thing about it is we are coming into fundraising season, so now is the time. Now is the time to be taking action, which is very exciting. All right, so before we're done, we'll open it up for Q&A here in a minute. I do want to give you a resource. I want to talk about this just in case you're thinking, this is great, but I don't really know where to start. Or maybe you're feeling a little overwhelmed, or you're feeling like, I don't really know anything about fundraising. That's not why I got into this. I don't know that I'm the right person to do this, even though it's on your shoulders. Maybe you're spending a lot of time looking for answers online. You may be overwhelmed by the amount of free information that's out there, and you can't figure out which pieces of it to implement. I get that. I've been there. Maybe you're even saying to yourself, who am I to do this? I don't know that I have the right knowledge, the right right skills. Maybe I'm not the right person to do this. I get that. I get that. I've been there. That's where I was that whole first year of working at the food bank. And it took me a while. The learning curve was steep. And now I can't stand to see anybody struggle with that. So I have this resource that I want to share with you because it will strip a lot of that out. It's called Fundraising TV. It's an online program that contains a success path that will basically walk you through the steps you need to grow your organization predictably and sustainably. Think of it as a course. It's an online course that walks through 4 different stages of growth that any organization goes through. And what happens in the program is you take a quiz, and it tells you which stage you're in. And then it delivers fundraising training in small bites that are all in video that you can watch whenever you want. They're all on demand. You can watch them when it works for you and help you put the pieces in place you need to grow your organization. So it eliminates all the guessing. It eliminates all the, I got to figure this out myself. It's very automated and systematized, and it's actually fun. We have some gamification built in so that everything you do earns you coins that you can exchange in the coin store for additional training and resources, or even time with a coach, which is pretty cool. So we'll walk you all the way through step by step, show you what to do so you never have to guess, you never have to wonder, just do the work that's in front of you. And so I think it's a cool program. It's a program I wish I had had 20 years ago when I was getting started. We give you everything that you might need for each micro lesson. So right now, as I said, it's coming into fundraising season, and maybe you're thinking, I don't have any idea what I should be doing to prepare for fundraising season. Great, we've got you covered. There's a micro lesson on that. There's a micro lesson on how to do a Giving Tuesday campaign. There's a micro lesson on how to pitch a story to your local news for the holidays. There's a micro lesson on how to do a thankathon and holiday cards and all that sort of stuff. And in each lesson, you're going to get templates, tools, and checklists that help make this all really easy. You'll get swipe files with real world examples so that you can see, what did somebody else do? We have a members only community that you can access anytime, 24/7, to ask questions and to reach our coaches. And then we also give you weekly inspiration. I'll give you a little shot in the arm every Monday morning just to remind you that this is important work you're doing, and keep going. You got this. We have lots of people who've had amazing success in the program. Jenny cracks me up. She needed to raise some money to provide health insurance for 112 children in Tanzania. She sent out an email, and because she had been doing such a good job relationship building, it was 100% funded in just a few hours, which was incredible. That was really, really fast. Beverly did Giving Tuesday for the first time and just blew past her goal of $6,000. So and what I want to tell you is we have all kinds of organizations in Fundraising TV. There's a lot of animal welfare. There's some food pantries. There's some international organizations. There's all kinds of different things. And we have organizations that are quite large, multi-million-dollar organizations, and we have some that are all volunteer. So no matter where you are, the program will work for you, and there's people just like you in there. So come check it out. It's $39 a month. And if you can't get enough value out of it, then you need to talk to me about that. There's a crazy amount of resources and knowledge and how-to in the program. It is well worth $39 a month. So come and have a look at it. I think you'll really enjoy it. You can stay as long as you want. You can try it, cancel in 30 days if you want to, whatever works for you. But I think you'll really like it once you get into it.